What if Darth Maul killed Darth Sidious on Mandalore? Our story begins on Mandalore as Maul sits in his newly acquired throne with his brother by his side. He couldn't help but feel proud at himself. After months of planning, his grand scheme was finally coming to fruition. With Mandalore under his control, it was only a matter of time before the rest of the coalition of neutral systems was under his leadership. But then, something began to change within the Force. He could feel the shivers of fear run down his spine. He felt a dark presence he hasn't felt since his master, Darth Sidious, was here. But how and why? He thought he would have been preoccupied with the war and his grand plan. But before he could fully comprehend what was happening, his former master in the flesh was in front of him. As fear and horror overcame Maul, he instinctively bowed down to his former master and tried to talk his way out of this. But that was impossible now, as Sidious saw right through his ploy and force pushed him and Savage into the glass and out of the window. Coming to the realization that there was only one way he could come out of this alive, he and Savage would attack the Sith with all of their might. As a crimson blade clashed and echoed through the halls, Sidious would begin to realize that his former apprentice had grown significantly stronger since his last encounter with him, but that did not matter as he would make short work of Maul and his brother if he was correct. As their fight continued, Maul and Savage would begin to chip away at Sidious' endurance and power as they kept on persisting. Seeing how Maul's brother was a weaker of the two, Sidious would try to separate them and then target Maul, which would prove to be harder than expected as Maul and Savage would stay close together and would never leave each other's side. Ironic, they reminded Sidious a lot like the Jedi, weak and unwilling to sacrifice one another. Well then, if they acted like the Jedi, then they shall die like the Jedi. Summoning more of his strength, Sidious would charge at Savage and manage to backflip over him and cut him across the back and force push him into a wall. As Savage cried out in pain, Maul would realize that it was up to him to kill Palpatine and live another day. Channeling all of his hatred to the Jedi, the Sith, the galaxy, everything, Maul would rush at the Sith with a fury he's never achieved before and fought Palpatine, pushing his former master into a defensive form for a short amount of time as the old man's exhaustion started to catch up with him. And that was until Palpatine had enough and went to end the rogue Sith once and for all by doing the spin of death, when he suddenly felt a hot pain through his chest. And when he looked down, he saw a red crimson blade burning a hole through his chest. And before he could react to that, Maul ran up to the Sith and beheaded him, ending the Sith Lord's life. After seeing the lifeless body of Palpatine fall to the ground, the man who caused all of his pain, Maul ran over to his dying brother's side, who used the last of his strength to throw his saber into Palpatine to save his brother's life. Unfortunately, although Savage was able to save Maul, Maul was not able to return the favor, as his brother gave in to his wounds. Following this, Maul would begin the construction of a new army, not of just Mandalorians, but this time of criminals as well. He would create the first criminal empire. A few days later, the Republic Senate would be thrown into disarray as our Chancellor still had not returned from wherever he went. The truth is, only Mas Almeida knew where Palpatine truly was. He was supposed to be on Mandalore fighting the rogue Sith, but Mas couldn't just tell everyone about Palpatine's true intentions, so he would lie and say that Palpatine was killed by a separatist while on a diplomatic mission to Mandalore, which would erupt the Senate into mass chaos. And before the Senate could decide on the next course of action, a sudden transmission from Mandalore appeared in front of them. And much to the shock of Yoda and Mace who were viewing this situation, the rogue Sith Darth Maul was at the forefront holding the head of Palpatine. And while his message was brief, he made it clear that Palpatine was a Sith and that a new empire was to come, a criminal empire. And just like that, he was gone. And for the first time in thousands of years, the entire Galactic Senate was quiet. Not a word was muttered for what felt like hours until absolute chaos broke out. But they wouldn't even have time for that, as only minutes later, reports would come in as an army of what seemed to be criminals and Mandalorians started to lay siege to the Outer Rim worlds from the newly formed Crimson Dawn under the control of Maul. And while the newly formed empire was small, it was large enough to take control over multiple star systems. And this would send the already crippled Republic into mass turmoil as the already depleted clone army and the weakened Jedi tried to protect what they could but were quickly falling back. Back in the Senate, there were multiple discussions all at once on what the next course of action should be, and no matter how hard Mas tried, there was no order in the court. But eventually, the senators would agree that it was time for the purchase of 10 million more clones, with an overwhelming 90% in favor of it. But that would come at the cost of a loss of funding for many support groups throughout the galaxy that gave help and supplies to those who needed it. And due to that, many star systems became desperate and would leave the Republic to join the warring factions, which would weaken the Republic even further. And while the Republic might have put up a very tough fight in the Outer Rim, the Crimson Dawn was pushing through and started to construct a larger army of criminals. Soon after taking most of the Outer Rim and having a large enough army, the new criminal empire led by Maul would begin to attack the Mid-Rim, but this time, unlike their previous conquests, they were met with a lot more resistance, and this time not from the Republic, but rather the CIS, who realized that the criminal empire, if it kept growing stronger, would rival the might of the Separatists. and due to having no shortage of battle droids, the CIS would begin a full-fledged campaign against the Crimson Dawn, and would begin to fight back on the backwater worlds of the galaxy that once belonged to them, and they would send millions of B-1 and B-2 battle droids to recapture their lost land. However, Maul, thanks to spending a lot of time with Palpatine, learned how to create contingency plans, and had already begun preparing for a moment like this, and waited to the right moment to release his own army of battle droids that he had made in a forgotten droid factory. And while his army was nowhere near as much as the CIS, nor as well equipped, it would cause some confusion among many separatist generals who often mistook the enemy droids as their own, and the CIS were soon starting to lose their war. Eventually, following the creation of their own battle droid army, Maul would begin to experiment on creating his own clone army, but that would be quickly shot down as the Republic intervened and fought off the Empire thanks to General Skywalker and Obi-Wan, who had finally begun their hunt of Maul. But while the Republic may have been able to stop Maul's Empire from creating their own clone army, they unfortunately were not able to prevent the creation of over 8 million new battle droids on Maul's side, who with that number managed to take over another droid factory, and this would force the war to rage on for 2 more years as both the Republic and CIS began to get pushed back by Maul's Empire, which the Republic thought was impossible as a criminal empire should have been weakened. But due to the Republic leaving the underworld and the criminal syndicates unchecked for multiple years, their power and influence across the galaxy had far surpassed what the Republic thought was possible. But thanks to the leadership of the newly elected Supreme Chancellor Bail Organa, the Republic was able to secure some peace talks with the Separatist Alliance, who both agreed that if they were to stay at war with each other, they would both perish in a matter of years. And so they would both reluctantly agree for a temporary peace treaty and focus all of their resources on taking down the rogue Sith's empire. And while Dooku may have disagreed with any peace treaty back when Palpatine was still alive, he realized that if the Separatists wanted to survive, they would need the Republic's help. And while the Republic and CIS might have agreed to work together, it was not an easy task, as many clones and Jedi had a very hard time being able to trust their lives with the very people who just a few months ago were at war with. But nevertheless, they would start to work together and begin to take on the growing threat of the criminal empire. Maul, however, would not be concerned. He always knew that something like this would happen, and he, like his late master, was already working on another plan. And this plan of his was to create a new dark side apprentice. And with the help of the Night Sisters and some holocrons by Darth Plagueis, Maul would be able to create a young Zabrak boy born of pure dark side and Night Sister magic, and his name was Malachi. And while he was only 16 thanks to his enhanced aging, he was already far more powerful than most Jedi Knights, and he housed many similar features to that of Savage. And he would prove his power in the dark side when he was able to take on a group of Jedi and clones and left no survivors. He would also prove his loyalty to Maul when he managed to kill the rogue group of Mandalorians led by Bo-Katan and a young Twi'lek Jedi named Ahsoka. And while the Jedi might have put up a tough fight, Malachi was able to kill her and the rest of her rebel cell. Eventually, the Jedi Order, who already almost lost 1,000 Jedi members, would take on a drastic action as it would knight over 500 Jedi Padawans, and would take a drastic action and collect over 2,000 infants to be trained, which definitely made them less popular in the public opinion. But this would help the Republic lead to an influx of victories. But this also would lead to a decrease in Republic morale, as many deaths would occur as ill-trained Jedi Knights were thrown into battles. And while the galaxy was in a dark and grim place, there was a new hope emerging, as Anakin's power was increasing every day, and after a couple of years, his power would even rival that of Grandmaster Yoda, who, similar to Dooku's, old age was catching up to them, although Dooku's was much worse as the dark side started to affect his body in worse ways. And while on a mission with his old master Yoda, they would be confronted by Maul and a legion of Mandalorians, and despite them being caught off guard, Dooku would decide to take on Maul while Yoda attacked the Mandalorians, which, due to their old age, was not an easy task, as Maul was able to match each and every one of Dooku's strikes. He nearly took off his head, but was stopped by Grandmaster Yoda, who decided to fight alongside his former Padawan, and the combined power of both Force wielders started to be too much for Maul. And while retreating made it seem like the best option, he decided that he wouldn't do that, as he would engage the Jedi once again, as he force-pushed Dooku and flipped over Yoda, and only milliseconds after that would quickly deflect one of Dooku's strikes before ducking under Dooku and stabbing him through the back, just like he did with Qui-Gon Jinn all those years ago, only this time behind him. To much of the horror of Yoda, who after seeing another one of his friends get mortally wounded, would charge at Maul, catching him off guard, and would quickly slice off one of his arms and would shoot a powerful barrage of Force judgment that he learned from Plo Koon at Maul. And Maul, having no other choice, would make his escape with barely his life. As Yoda watched Maul's ship leave, Yoda would use the Force to crush one of its engines and would watch the ship crash down into the surface of the planet. But before it crashed, an escape pod would eject and would squirm its way out and would jump into hyperspace. Turning away in anger, Yoda would run to Dooku's side and would comfort his former Padawan in his last moments, where Dooku would apologize for turning to the dark side and would reveal to Yoda the true plans of the inheritorships and the clones. And just like his Padawan, Dooku would die as a result of Maul, and would join the light side of the Force one last time. With the death of Dooku, there would be an open position for leadership in the CIS, and while Wat Tambor was initially going to take it, he mysteriously turned up dead, which would make way for the psychotic robot General Grievous to become the leader of the CIS. And his first course of action as the leader would be to ramp up the production of battle droids by 40%. And while the Republic and CIS were technically at peace right now, that did not mean they trusted the cyborg general. If anything, this only heightened their tensions. But even though the Republic did not want to admit it, they were starting to win this war. This would be proven by their first major victory, which would be given when Anakin Skywalker and Plo Koon managed to take over Tatooine and would put an end to the Hutt cartel for good by killing Jabba and capturing most of the Hutt leaders. But that would be a very costly battle, as Maul was not willing to give up the planet without a fight, due to that being the location of one of their droid factories. And the Jedi would also lose many members, including Jedi Master Jara Tapal and Jedi Knight Cal Kestis, and thousands of clones, including Commander Cody, who would die in Obi-Wan's arms. But the Jedi would prevail and continue to drive the Crimson Dawn out of the system, and that would be a major blow to Maul, as the Hutts are one of his main suppliers, and now without them, he was set back quite a bit. After the liberation of Tatooine, Yoda would begin to do a bit of research in the clones and the inhibitor chips, and thanks to Five's research before he died, Yoda would learn of Order 66, which would shock him. And while yes, he did know that the clones were made by the Sith, he was still shocked that the Jedi were so blind to this. This would result in Yoda calling an emergency meeting with the Jedi Council, where they would decide to slowly withdraw the clones from battle to remove their inhibitor chips. However, this was a really risky decision, as it would lead them open to attacks. However, the process in which they would remove the inhibitor chips was very quick, as it only took them around 5 minutes to do, and the clones would rebound very quickly and return to battle, and after only 2 months, the entire Grand Army of the Republic was freed from the inhibitor chips. And this, partnered with the recent victories, the Republic and Separatist morale was at an all-time high as they kept on pushing back Maul's empire. But Maul still had one secret weapon left up his sleeve, and that was his apprentice Malachi, whose power over the years had significantly increased, so much so that he was even able to kill Opa Ren Sistis on the battle. But that would backfire, as it would be the final straw for the Jedi, who would make Malachi their #1 target and would begin to send out search and destroy parties. But as they searched the galaxy for the new Sith assassin, he would just drop off the radar, and following that, Maul would also seemingly disappear as well. But that would not matter, as the Crimson Dawn was still able to fight back against the Republic and was actually able to secure many more planets to their cause, such as Ryloth and Mon Cala, which was a major blow to the Republic, as they were one of the best shipbuilders in the galaxy. And because of that, the Republic would begin to lose many battles across the galaxy, as they were far superior of that of many regular warships. But luckily, in this time frame, they would be able to locate the planet in which Maul was hiding, which was the Sith planet of Malachor. But before they could decide on a course of action to take, they would be notified that General Grievous and over half of the Separatist army had broken off from the Alliance and joined Maul. But before he left, he would destroy almost all the droid factories and would completely decimate Geonosis, leaving it a complete barren wasteland with no living inhabitants, which would cripple the Republic and the remaining Separatists. And this would cost them many planets to fall out of their control. And as if the Jedi couldn't catch a break, Grandmaster Yoda would also die only a few months later, when he and Anakin were attacked by a legion of Mandalorians and criminals, which this fight would not have been a challenge for a younger Yoda, but due to his old age, it finally got the best of him as he was shot in the back by Gar Saxon, sending Anakin into a blinding rage, killing all of the Mandalorians. And wasting no time, Anakin would bring Yoda back to the Jedi Temple and would try to save him, but Yoda would refuse and tell Anakin that it was the will of the Force. But before he died and joined the Force, he would make Anakin a Jedi Master. After the funeral of Master Yoda, the Jedi would select a new Grand Master, which would be none other than Mace Windu, who would humbly accept the offer. And under the new leadership of Mace Windu, the Jedi would begin to lead many successful campaigns against the Crimson Dawn, and would bring home some much-needed victories. However, this success would only be short-lived, as Supreme Chancellor Bail Organa would be killed while on a mission to Mon Cala to try and restore friendly relations. However, he would never arrive to the planet, as he was killed shortly after entering the atmosphere by General Grievous, who ambushed him. And all of this would be watched from the shadows of Malachor, where Maul continued his training of Malachi, who is now arguably stronger than almost any other Jedi. And Maul, seeing this, would gift Malachi a second lightsaber. And while this was happening, Maul would begin to see the instability across the galaxy, and would begin preparations for a full-scale invasion of Coruscant. And thanks to General Grievous's intel, they would begin their attack on Coruscant, led by Maul, Malachi, and General Grievous. And while a main part of the battle was in the sky, the Crimson Dawn, led by General Grievous, would charge at the surface of Coruscant and would begin their conquest there. And while there was very stiff resistance on the surface, Grievous would destroy anything that stood in his way, as he only had one target, the Senate building. In the flagship of the Crimson Dawn, Maul and Malachi would depart for the Jedi Temple to wipe out the Jedi once and for all. And thanks to the Cyber General, many of the Jedi would be at the Senate building, leaving only the weaker Jedi at the Temple, which made it the perfect time for an attack. And just as Maul predicted, most of the Jedi left the Temple to stop General Grievous' in the Senate, which would be much harder than they thought, as General Grievous not only set the entire building on fire, but also hid the captured senators across the building, which added to the fact that there were already tens of thousands of battle droids in there, made it practically impossible to save everyone. But they would not back down and would decide to split up into multiple groups to save anyone they could, which was just what General Grievous wanted them to do, as he lurked in the shadows. Back at the Jedi Temple, Maul and Malachi made their way through the halls and slaughtered everyone there. It was even easier than they thought, as they managed to wipe out floor after floor, and after making it to the 5th floor of the Jedi Temple, they were stopped by Anakin, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, as well as Agen Kolar. And after waiting years for this moment, Maul would be overcome with rage and anger towards Obi-Wan and would tell Malachi to take on the other Jedi, and that Kenobi was his. Cut back to the space battle, it was a pretty even fight, but even so, Maul's empire was slowly gaining ground, as they used unconventional methods to fight off the Republic and Separatist forces. But thanks to the help of many great Jedi pilots such as Saesee Tiin, they would be able to keep on fighting against their enemy. But as long as the Crimson Dawn's flagship was still intact, the battle droids would not stop. So Saesee Tiin would order all the remaining starfighters to begin their attack on the flagship. Back in the Senate building, it was getting harder and harder to find the senators, as much of the Senate building was already on fire, and many of the rooms started to collapse. But the Jedi would not retreat, as they kept on searching through the Senate, trying to save anyone they could. Unfortunately, the Jedi would only manage to save a little over half of the senators before they were forced to retreat. But leaving the Senate would be almost impossible, as battle droids patrolled all the halls and shot anything that moved. And eventually, after a long time of searching, they would finally find an exit. But right as they reached it, General Grievous would finally show himself and would charge at the Jedi, quickly cutting down 4 of the Jedi Masters protecting the senators. But before Grievous could kill everyone there, he would finally meet his match, as Jedi Master Kelleran Beck stepped from behind him and would challenge him to a fight. Back at the Jedi Temple, Maul was quickly showing to Obi-Wan that this would be the hardest fight of his life, as Maul swung his blade with such strength and ferocity that every time it clashed against Obi-Wan's, Kenobi would be forced to take a few steps back. But realizing that Maul's aggression was actually making him sloppy, Obi-Wan would use this to his advantage, as Maul tried to use the same move he used on Qui-Gon all those years ago, and Obi-Wan would play along with this until the last moment, where he would sidestep and trip Maul, angering him even further, which caused him to swing more wildly and sloppy. But as Obi-Wan ducked under one of Maul's strikes, he felt a searing pain in his left leg as Maul cut deep into his flesh, and would use this opportunity to cut off one of Obi-Wan's hand. It was about to go in for the kill when Kenobi force pushed Maul into a wall, when Obi-Wan lunged from where he was and was about to plunge his lightsaber into Maul's heart, when Maul suddenly grabbed him by the neck and was about to snap it, when Maul suddenly fell to the ground as a purple lightsaber burned a hole in his chest, ending the Sith's life. Back in the space battle, the Republic forces were able to land a critical hit on the flagship, and were moving in for the next strike when Saesee Tiin was blown out of the sky by a group of TIE-fighters. But despite this devastating loss, the assault would continue, as the Republic forces managed to blow up the ship's thrusters and hit his hyperdrive, making it a sitting duck. And right after that, Captain Rex would seize their opportunity and would land the final blow, destroying the Crimson Dawn's flagship, automatically shutting down all of the battle droids under Maul's control, which allowed the Republic and Separatists to destroy much of the remaining fleet. Back in the Senate building, General Grievous laughed at the Jedi. How could he be so stupid to challenge him? Didn't he know who he was? It didn't matter, however. General Grievous would slowly walk over to him with his lightsaber spinning very fast as a way to intimidate the Jedi. But Kelleran would not move, as he instantly force-pulled one of General Grievous's lightsabers from his hand and charged at him, and would quickly use the Force again to force-push General Grievous into the flames. And before Grievous even had time to get up, Kelleran was already on top of him, destroying his defenses, and Grievous would quickly kick the Jedi off and would begin to throw fiery debris at the Jedi, who easily deflected all of the debris to the side, and would lunge at the cyborg once again. After Kelleran dodged another one of Grievous's attack and cut off one of his arms, Grievous started to think that maybe he had underestimated this Jedi, as he's putting up much more of a fight than any other Jedi had. And Kelleran would seize this opportunity and would switch up to Form 1, Grievous's single weakness. Grievous would try to jab at Kelleran, but would miss, as the Jedi would slide under it and slice across his leg, and would force push Grievous across the room. And before Grievous could even move, Kelleran would run up to him and cut off 2 of his arms, leaving him with only 1 lightsaber. Seeing how he was outmatched by the Jedi, Grievous would call to his droids to kill him. But that was impossible. The only way that could have happened is if the flagship was destroyed. And after looking through the hole in the Senate building, he saw an explosion on where the flagship used to be. And while Grievous was incredibly angered, he realized that that's what you get when you use the cheaper and older models of droids. Overcome with anger, Grievous would charge at Kelleran one last time, would order the remaining droids to shoot at him, which Kelleran would easily deflect back at the Grievous and once again engage Grievous in a saber lock, where Grievous would use the cybernetic foot to grab another lightsaber and was about to raise it up to stab Kelleran, but would be too slow as the Jedi Master would flip over him and would cut off his legs and would stab him in the head, finally ending the mad cyborg. After that, Kelleran would destroy the remaining droids and would help evacuate the surviving senators outside of the building, where only moments after leaving the Senate building, the entire building would collapse. killing anyone who was unfortunate enough to be left inside of the building. Back in the Jedi Temple, Malachi looked over, hoping to see his master and call him over to help him, only to see that he was dead. Filled with more rage than he'd ever felt before, he would unleash a Force scream and would shot Force lightning at all of the Jedi. And the second he stopped doing that, he would lunge at Aiden Kolar and would cut off his arm and then his lower half, and would rush straight towards Plo Koon and Ki-Adi-Mundi. And while Mundi stood no chance against a powerful Sith as he quickly fell dead, Plo Koon would shoot his own barrage of Force judgment at the young Zabrak, which shocked him, as he quickly tried to deflect it. And while it was not as powerful, it gave Plo the opportunity he needed to land a blow against Malachi. Following in his footsteps, Mace Windu and Anakin would charge at the Sith, but before anything could reach him, he would release a powerful Force illusion, making it seem as if there are dozens of Malachi. Feeding off of their fear, Malachi would single out Plo Koon and would try to slice at his feet but would miss, and quickly blocked a returning blow. And sensing through the Force, Malachi would be able to feel Plo Koon and would spin around him and slice him across the chest, leaving him gasping for air, leaving only Mace Windu and Anakin Skywalker left. And as Malachi began to attack Mace Windu, which would prove to be a mistake, as Mace would use Vapod against Malachi to feed off of his anger, Mace Windu would manage to cut one of Malachi's lightsabers in half, and Anakin would seize the opportunity to try to distract the Sith by throwing his lightsaber at him and Force pushing him. But Malachi would easily dodge that and would return the favor by shooting Force lightning at Anakin's face. And Mace Windu, seeing an opening in the Sith's defense, was able to use the opportunity to cut the side of the Sith and was about to kill him once and for all when he was stopped by Malachi, when he delivered a quick liver punch to Mace Windu, followed by a quick stab in his upper chest. After seeing Mace Windu fall, Anakin ran towards the Sith and would use chunks of the temple to throw at Malachi, and would manage to land another blow on him, but would quickly be countered and would be forced to enhance his speed to push back against the Sith, which would only anger Malachi even further as he started to fight more aggressively like his master. And after a few minutes of lightsaber duels, Anakin would see an opening in Malachi's defense and would uppercut him in the face. And Malachi, stunned by this, would force push Anakin off of this and would quickly punch him in the gut, leaving Anakin out of breath. But using his anger, Anakin retaliated by a quick punch to Malachi's throat. And as Malachi tried to catch his breath, Anakin would sneak behind it, would slam him to the ground, and would start beating the Sith until he was force pushed off of him, where Anakin would use this to pull his lightsaber to his hand, and where he would slice across Malachi's stomach and would use the momentum to stab his head. And as the Sith fell, Anakin would stand in shock as he looked around him and saw all the pain and destruction that had occurred because of the Sith. And Anakin would quickly rush out of it, seeing that some of the Jedi were still alive, and would rush them to the medbay. In the moment Anakin got them to a safe location, he would run to the Senate building, where he was met with the horrifying discovery that the entire building had collapsed. And after arriving to the former entrance of the Senate building, he would rush over and would see that Padme was still alive. After the Battle of Coruscant was finished and the Crimson Dawn was destroyed for good, the Republic and Separatists would agree to join together once again, but only under the condition that the Republic had to change many other policies, in which after much negotiating, they would reluctantly agree to this. And thus the Clone Wars would end, and at the end of the war, over 3,000 Jedi were killed. And while it would take many decades, the galaxy would rebuild and recover, and the Jedi would learn from their past mistakes, and would decide to once again have many temples spread out across the galaxy to truly be the heroes the people needed. And while the temple on Coruscant still stood as their main temple, it wouldn't be required for the Jedi to live there. And Anakin, seeing how the Jedi had improved and the threat of the Sith finally gone, Anakin would decide to leave the Jedi Order in the trusted hands of Plo Koon and Obi-Wan, and the newly appointed council member Kelleran Beck, who proved himself after killing General Grievous. And after this, Anakin, Padme, and his two kids, Luke and Leia, would retire from their former roles and would live on the planet of Naboo, where Anakin would train his children in the ways of the Force. And that is what if Darth Maul killed Darth Sidious on Mandalore. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know what you thought on this what if. And now for some questions that I feel like should be answers. The reason Luke and Leia weren't really a figure in the story is because they weren't really born yet. And the reason that happened is because due to the war heating up, Anakin would not have time to visit Padme on Coruscant. And the reason General Grievous left the alliance between the Republic and Separatists was due to his immense hatred of the Jedi and Republic. And finally, how was Kelleran able to kill General Grievous? This was mainly used to Kelleran being a master of all 7 lightsaber forms, and he was one of the best lightsaber duelists in the entire order. But the reason he was actually able to kill General Grievous was because of his use of Form 1 against him, which for those of you who don't know was actually really effective against Grievous. Anyway, I hope that clears some things up for you guys, and once again, I really hope you enjoyed this what if. And with that, my fellow Star Wars nerds, may the Force be with you.